I'm Professor Rothschild. I'm with the Marriott School. I teach international business, primarily in the MBA program. I want to introduce a colleague of mine, Professor Lizbeth Claus. I'll give her a brief introduction, but I don't want to take too much of your time. Let me introduce where she comes from and a little bit about her background. She's a professor at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, which is a private graduate school, primarily in California, located south of San Francisco, up in the mountain coast. Their focus is primarily on a multicultural type of education. Their student body is made up of not just students from throughout the world, but a huge mix. You don't just find classes in which you'll have 8 or 10 students who don't come from the United States, who the majority of them. In fact, the Americans are kind of in the minority. It's a very multicultural experience from a diverse part of the world in many different places, Africa, Middle East, and every name it. That makes the educational experience very much focused on global culture change, the uses of human resources with respect to the multicultural setting, and provides an interesting interchange between those who are studying both in the public policy side as well as in the international business side, as well as those who are in languages and interpretation and other degrees that are offered. That affects her background and the fact that she's in the faculty dealing with human resources, and particularly human resource activities in multinational settings, and the cross-cultural challenges and cross-cultural opportunities that affect managing people in organizations throughout the world. And her background is in that area, and that's where she does her research and her teaching. She holds a PhD from St. Louis University. Her background is in sociology, and from that she's moved into the HR and the global HR aspects. She publishes widely. She has a lot of industrial experience. She was a human resources development director with a major grocery chain before going into the faculty, and brings a lot of business experience as well. And so I'd like to introduce you to her. She'll be presenting a topic on some of the emerging challenges and opportunities that have come on recently within human resources aspects of the multicultural and global cultural situations, and a little bit more about the institution where she works and the impact that they're doing with respect to affecting the global environment of managing people. So, Professor Lizbeth Claus, I have a copy of her overhead presentations that she's given to me. I'll make those available after class. You don't have to worry about taking specific detailed notes. It has both the overhead as well as a summary article which explains it in a narrative form as well. So it's very thorough and comprehensive, and be sure to get one of these before you leave.
I didn't really grow up thinking I'm going to go into human resources. It wasn't part of my and I think most people of my generation who are currently in human resources came from either sociology, psychology, law, or an undergraduate degree in liberal arts. Now, I went into international HR, and there was really something in my background that kind of predetermined me to do so. I grew up in Belgium after the Second World War, and before the age of 4, I was already speaking different languages. When I spoke with my mother, I would speak in French. When I spoke with my father, I would speak in Flemish. And my grandfather lived with us, and he would speak German to us. And when I spoke to God, I spoke in Hebrew. So I very much realized very early on in life that it wasn't really a matter of translation, that these different people and the families that were behind them, because we were very large families, they all had a different way of doing things, and they were all weird in their own ways, and it wasn't just translating. And so maybe that's why I went into international business, because I experienced very early on this cross-cultural kind of interaction. Now, as the millennium came about, and then after we were through with the Y2K scare that really didn't come through, the human resource profession realized that the world was a little bit different. And, every time you change, fin de siècle or end of the centuries are always very good for changes in thinking and in paradigms. And so the Society for Human Resource Management last August, seeing that the external environment in the new century had changed, the dot-coms were going down, high-tech was changing, downsizing was starting again, brought a group of people together in Washington for a think tank on the future of human resources. And I was invited as the quote-unquote global token representative, since I had made some kind of a name in international HR. And so we were about 24 people for 3 days in Washington, and lots of work prior to going there, homework that we had to do. And our task was to, each of us, prepare a position paper on what the challenges and opportunities of HR were. And obviously, since I was in global HR, I put global HR. And as we were going through that, we were in those meetings really thinking that it was really the new millennium that had brought about this change. But suddenly, something happened, and we realized it really wasn't the new millennium. What it was that brought about the change in people management and in human capital was September 11. On September 11, about 3,600 people went to work and died on the job. And as a human resource management, it's your corporate responsibility to take care of the safety of the workers when they are on the job. That is part of human resource management. Now, human resource managers have put into place security safety programs. They have disaster prevention programs, limited ones. They have programs against anti-kidnapping of people. They have programs against violence in the workplace. They have all these programs that they have put in place. And they have also programs against what they call the acts of God, which is earthquakes and big natural disasters. But no human resource manager in the past century had anything in place for acts of evil. Just didn't do that. Now, on that particular day, what we also realized is that we were no longer a domestic environment. In that building were workers from 80 different countries. Now, when I start naming countries, and I'm a pretty international kind of person, when I get to 60, 65, I kind of run out of countries. How many countries do you think there are in the world? Wow, this is a real international crowd. Yeah, I think the last number I saw was 192 and 40 dependent states. But most of us really don't have, a great knowledge of about 100 and, 60. I don't think we have even that great a knowledge. We usually have a regional knowledge or something like that. But we realized at that time that we were really a global environment. And some writers have actually said that it is very well possible that this attack was not just an attack against America, but that it was an attack against globalization. There have actually been a number of editorials that it was an attack against the forces of governments that promote free trade, against corporations that are multinational, and that supposedly globalization was Americanization, quote unquote. So we've really realized, and as we continued our work in that HR group where we are now meeting virtually, we realized it wasn't the new millennium that had changed the meaning of human capital. It really was the realization that globalization is there, and whether we call it inevitable or not, that we're going to have to look at the forces between globalization and anti-globalization, because the people that are working in these environments, which are these corporate environments, they're going to have to be managed in a new paradigm. And so we are now kind of rewriting the book on what this new people management paradigm is going to be. Now, I'm talking for people that are usually going to professions of human resource, but you know, human resource is really people management at work. And people at work are going to be very, very different. So just a very recent article by Peter Drucker in The Economist, he foresees that people in the next 20 years aren't going to be working at work. They're just going to be working. That's, you know, I'm thinking, gee, as a human resource professional, all my theories and all my concepts and all my practices, they deal with people coming to the office, people coming to a place of work. Right? So we're really going to have to rethink how we're going to manage people who are going to be working while they're living, not in a particular place. Their private life is going to become much more work life, and their work life is going to become a lot more private. They're going to do private things at work, and they're going to do work things at home, which is a very different way. It's going to have tremendous ramification for our value systems, for how our priorities, and what we do. So I'd like to do today is kind of review the three major trends that, you know, if we want to look at what the future is going to be in a profession, it's always good to look back as to where we have been and where we've been coming from. So I'm going to review three major trends in the profession of HR. The profession of HR is about 25-year-old, really, as a profession. And then I'm going to identify what these changes mean for people who are actually working in managing people, and suggest four particular areas for the future that I think we're going to have to start paying attention to if we're going to work in this global environment. And then also, this might not be as appropriate for you here, but make some recommendations for the current practitioners who are already in the field. This is a little bit cumbersome here, but I'm getting there. I have it all layered, so I'm having to. The first shift that we have is a shift, and I'll just put them all three up there, is a shift from personnel administration to strategic human resource management. About 25 years ago, personnel was just the people who kept your files and made sure your paycheck came out there, and it was a very administrative kind of thing. And we kind of moved that and said, well, management of people are your most important assets. We need to do this in a more strategic way. And so we've had that paradigm shift. A second paradigm shift that we've had is really from a domestic environment to a global environment. More and more in the last 20 years, companies are sending their people out to work on expatriate assignments, bringing people in to work from other countries, and they're also having operations in more than one country, and they need to manage that. And then the final paradigm shift is from a traditional economy HR to an e-economy HR, a new economy HR. And what that really is that all these things that we used to do on paper, with paper and pencil, we are now doing in EHRM systems. And so the people who were doing all this stuff, this administrative stuff, now really are out of a job because this stuff is being disembodied. It's being done by systems, such as self-service systems where you look up your benefits, all kinds of stuff related to where you're at in your company as a worker. Now, these paradigm shifts have been going on, but the underlying, the driving forces behind each of them are very different. The driving force from the movement to strategic HR, from personnel administration, has really been in the 1980s, TQM and reengineering. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this movement that went on, that quality customers were important, and that we had quality means to serve the customers and the requirements of the customers. This brought about a customer orientation, but also a need within human resources and within the company to measure the productivity of people and the productivity of managing those people. And so we started to developing scorecards just like in TQM. the move to global HR was really a result of the globalization, of the growing interdependency between countries and then throughout the world, and also the need to share knowledge. Companies can no longer be competitive unless they can share, manage the knowledge that they own. Remember, the knowledge comes from the brains of the people. That the people are the means of production today. And so that knowledge, as your people can go from one place to another, the companies need to retain some of that knowledge. And so unless they manage that knowledge strategically, they lose their competitive advantage. So this now required global mindsets of people and required very different competencies. Now you can tell me, what is a global mindset? I mean, when I look at you, can I say, oh, he really has a global mindset? How do I, people say we need to hire people that have a global mindset. How do I figure that out? How would you select somebody? You all have your resumes ready to go for a job, and this company says we want to hire people with a global mindset. Every company wants to do that, by the way. So how do you prove I have a global mindset? Anyone? Yeah. Okay, so you've traveled. Good. Anything else? You worked abroad. You did internships. You worked. You speak different languages. Why would that be important for having a global mindset? Okay, you can communicate. Language is more than just technicalities. It's a culture. You learn what other people think, how they think. Any other way? Okay. Now we actually, when we get students into the Monterey Institute, we select students that have a global mindset. And we have a very easy formula to do that. I mean, we used to try to have really very sophisticated metrics, and tests and stuff like that. Now we have a very easy formula, and you've actually brought it up. We asked people, you must have lived abroad for a year. How many in this room have lived abroad for a year? Wow, this is incredible. Then we say, you must have spoken, worked in another language while you were abroad. How many have done that here? Wow. See, you're very close to having a global mindset. Now, this is really, it's going to be one of the competencies that is required of the workforce of today and of the workforce of the future. The last trend was a result of the dot-com phenomenon. Although the dot-coms are gone, most of them, their impact is not gone, because what they have done is they created a new work culture. Not necessarily good or bad. We're not making a judgment on it. But they really created a culture that had a major impact on how we are going to manage people in the future. And the other thing they did is that they had very geocentric staffing. What that means is that they just looked at the person who is the best to do the job independently what passport they hold. Now, they got a little bit in trouble with visas and stuff like that. They took care of that. So they said, we want the best candidate in the world. We don't care whether they're Indian, wherever they're coming from. We want that skill. And that's really what knowledge workers in the future are going to have to do. I mean, although we hear now about downsizing, what's really is going to happen in the future is that we will not have the knowledge workers that we need to run our companies. And so that's also one of the reasons that we're going to do a lot of contract work with knowledge workers. And that's really going to change the corporations, because they really aren't, they are now already planning on how they're going to have the people. They're laying them off right now, but 3 or 4 years from now, they are going to have such need for people. And they don't have need for bodies, they have need for brains, people that are knowledge workers and that have a global mindset. Now, the underlying thing among all of these changes is really information technology and human capital. I mean, human capital is a word we throw around a lot, but it's the ability of people to use their discretionary knowledge to solve problems. It's really the ability for us to do that. And not spoon-fed, but the ability to critically think when we solve problems. And obviously we can do that when we have a grounding in basic knowledge, which is what you acquire while you go to school here. We've learned a couple of lessons from these shifts. And the first lesson that we've learned is that we as human resource professionals or as managers, you know, I don't want to think that this is this title human, it's anybody who manages people at work. We are really very challenged today because human capital has never been so important. I mean, and we're not just paying lip service to it that people are important. They really, these knowledge workers are very important. And human resource professionals have never been so challenged because their skill set is an antiquated skill set to deal with this new environment. The second thing we learned is that as a result of that is that human resource managers are going to need a whole new set of competencies that they don't have, whether they're global competencies, whether there are e-competencies. And, you know, it's kind of hard when you're our generation to get into the e-competencies like you're getting into them, you know, because we're really from a different paradigm. The other thing that we are learning is that the U.S. model of how we do things in managing people, that there is around the world, and I was telling you about these globalization and anti-globalization tensions, and this is really something that we need to be very much aware of trying to understand. We don't make values about cultures. We don't say one culture is better than another. However, we need to realize that our cultural background, which is pretty much a Judeo-Christian background, is a very universalistic background. Namely, we have a set of commandments, and based on those commandments, we are applying them to situations. We are very much a minority, quote unquote, in the world in doing that. The rest of the world is very particularistic. What they do is they see a situation and they make a decision based on the situation. And that's how you can justify, and I'm not trying to justify here, but that's how you can justify killing someone or killing yourself for a greater cause. Because they really aren't dealing with those universalistic principles. And today in the world, and in the workplace especially too, and the anti-globalization trends, which we really need to learn to understand, there is this worldwide love-hate relationship with the way we do things. On the one way, everybody wants to come here and learn how we do things. And they admire it. But on the other hand, they hate it. They think it's very imperialistic. And so we also, in the way we manage our companies, is we take a model and we develop it here, made in the USA, and I don't mean to sound anti-USA. I just became a U.S. citizen, so I don't mean to do that. But we design it here within our cultural framework, of course, because we are from this culture, and then we export it. And we want to have the same rules everywhere, because this is also based on our universalistic base. We want to have equity. And so we think that being different is not being equal, is not equitable. So I'll give you an example. We designed a 360-degree evaluation system, which is, you know, where your boss does your performance review, and then you evaluate your boss. Well, this works very well in the United States because it's brought, you know, it's reduced the power distance between the manager and the employee. But when you bring that in a society like Japan or in any other society or like France, it just doesn't work. And so U.S. global companies like Walmart, and I'm not going to name companies as being negative or positive, like Marriott, they design a 360-degree system and they say, we're going to do this all over the world. And so the data that they get from the people doesn't work in different parts of the world. The last thing that we have learned is that we need to integrate the technology that we're using with the people. What we have done currently is that we can really run all the technical parts of HR with the computer. You don't need to ask your human resource representative anymore, what is my status of my benefit plan? We use self-service application in most organizations. You can just go in, look in, and see what happens. So we have disembodied a lot of the things that we do for people at work. We've just and so what we need to do now as a challenge is really be able to build these shared networks of people communities. And, people are working in teams with people, some in the U.S., some in Asia, some in Europe, different time zones, different places, and no face-to-face contact, and they really have to work together. And this is more and more in a global environment what we are going to see. And this is a lot of challenges. Now, the reality of HR today is that when I sketched you a little bit this new environment that we're going to be working in, is that most of the people who are working in HR, or most of the managers today, have a domestic orientation. They really aren't equipped to deal with that. And there is an extensive body of global HR, and it does require to have a global mindset to be able to work in that. And a lot of people just don't have it yet. And we also operate in this universalistic frame of reference, which might no longer be valid to operate around the world. And in general, most U.S. managers lack the language skills that we find in this room. They lack the cross-cultural skills that you have probably acquired as you went. If you stay 1 year abroad, you've been through the cross-cultural adjustment curve. Your cultural shock that you experience, and getting out of it takes about 9 months. So when you go through that process, it's really one of the ways that you acquire that cultural savvy that you need to work in a global environment. And so most of the people that are managing other people at work just don't have those skills today. Now, the Society for Human Resource Management has a global arm, and what they have done is they are currently in the process of codifying the body of knowledge that is necessary for people who are going to manage across borders. And they're codifying this in 6 different areas: strategic business management, organizational effective, being able to staff and recruit around the world, being able to move employees around the world, being able to set up compensation and benefit systems, and be able to look at the labor regulations and laws around the world. And that content is currently being assembled and is actually going to be put into a certification process. You can already, for American HR, become certified, and this is really a requirement now if you want to get a job in HR. So this new certification process will be ready in 2003. So that's a step into the right direction. Now, when I was trying to make my contribution on what the future is going to be for HR, I made this statement: global excellence depends on working effectively with the teams of the future that are going to be multifunctional, multicultural, multi-generational, that work fast, smart, and communicate virtually. This is what I think work will be like in the next 5 or 10 years. Not in the next 20 years, the next 5. We are getting there already in a lot of global companies. Now, the foundation to be able to work in that environment, the critical skills that people like yourself will need to acquire to work in such a global environment are 4 different kinds of skills: cross-cultural communication, multicultural teamwork, global leadership, and international ethics. Now, why do you think I'm focusing on these 4 interrelated parts? Well, I'm not saying you need to acquire, cognitive knowledge, bodies. These are really skill-related things. Yes?
Well, people have to be versatile. You have to be able to be dropped out of an airplane or a parachute, and wherever you land, you can succeed and do well.
Mm-hmm.
Managers don't want people that are just molded to one specific task. They want people who are versatile.
Good. Any other suggestions? You know, the companies that are going to hire you, they're going to teach you the trade that they're in. That's very easy for them to do. They'll say, oh, well, it doesn't mean, you know, you can't just say I'm going to be an accountant and not have any accountant background. But even if you have a degree in accounting, you're going to come into a firm, they'll pretty much train you how they do business in that firm and what you need to do. And they do that very well, companies. They do a very good job in general in teaching you, in training you what their corporate culture is, how they want you to do work in that company, and what their business is. But where they have a problem is they can't train people in those things because it's a lot more difficult. It requires a lot more specialized knowledge to train people in that. You know, you can learn accounting and concentrate on a cognitive subject, and within a couple of months master some of that basic knowledge. But learning how to work in global teams, getting cross-cultural savvy, you know, finding out how you make ethical decisions in an international environment, that relies on values. It relies on, you know, the learning curve is like, it's a spiral. You know, you go 2 steps forward and 1 step backward when you learn that kind of stuff. It's not linear. Or it's a bunch of S-curves. You know, you learn very fast and then you're plateauing, and you need experiences like living abroad, actually doing it to keep on learning on that. So I'd like to go into those 4 domains and kind of elaborate a little bit on what each one of these domains involves. The first one is cross-cultural communication. And what we really need to do, you know, you can go abroad like you've done and learn, but you really can also get prepared and learn in a more systematic manner. And what you do then is you understand the various value dimensions. Value dimensions like, how do people consider time? How do people consider authority? How do people communicate with one another? Are they high context or low context? Are they very direct, or do you have to try to find the meaning in that? So the other thing that people need to learn is how you can glocalize something. Now, this is kind of a funny term here, how you can, you know, look at what things can be standardized, what things are common to everyone, and look at the things that are not common, that you need to localize to the particular area. Because the more we can standardize, you know, although I was kind of making fun of universalism, if you want to, in the beginning, but the more you can standardize, the more you have economies of scale and scope. But the major trend in cross-cultural communication is really the 3R concept that von Strompenaars in his book Writing the Waves of Culture was talking about, is that you need to be able to recognize the differences among the people, and then you need to have a certain amount of respect for that, and then you need to be able to reconcile it. We're not going to do it like us, and we're not going to do it like them, but we're going to do it somewhere in a compromised way in between. And what is that compromised way in between, without losing who I am and not becoming completely like them? And that, you don't learn that overnight. That's a maturation process. That's a very difficult thing to learn. The next thing, which is probably one of the more important ones, is global teamwork. And what we need to learn in global teamwork is we need to understand team effectiveness in a variety of team configurations. And this might sound a little technical here, but what we really need to know is there is time. Are we working in the same time? Are we working synchronous or asynchronous? Are we working in the same locations or in distributed locations? Are we homogeneous in our cultural background, bicultural or multicultural? And are we working in our native tongue, or are we working in business English? And when you look at those 4 configurations, there are really a variety of ideal types that we see around the world. We might have a team that has a software team that's developing, that has people in India doing one part of the job, people in Europe doing another part of the job, people in Israel doing a third part of the job, and people in Silicon Valley doing other functions. And they are a team. They are working. They are the natural work group. And they work in different time zones with people from different cultures and different places. How do they accomplish the job working together? And we could say, well, you know, why do we make it this complicated? But these are the kinds of teams with mergers and acquisitions that are going on that people need to rely on to be competitive. We also need to learn that we won't be able to do everything virtually. That face-to-face contact is very important. And so how much of that face-to-face contact do we need? I mean, when J.P. Morgan Chase brings a group of their managers together, it costs them $200,000 just in one department to set up a meeting, because they're all over the world. So they have a great incentive not to do face-to-face because of the cost and the time involved. And they're still spending the money because they have shown through their research that unless you start off with a team with face-to-face contacts, you really aren't going to build that synergy that the team is going to need. So you're going to have to learn in the future, how will you work in those kind of teams? Will you be able to use the various groupwares that are available to work in those kind of teams? Will you be able to communicate with these people from various countries? And will you be able to get the productivity that is required to remain competitive? So this is a very, very difficult thing to do, and people are struggling with that. The next one, which is really one of my favorite subjects actually within my research, is international business ethics. And you could say, why are we putting that in there? Why are we putting ethics in working together in a global environment? Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, yes? Mm-hmm. You know, yeah? Very good. I mean, I really don't need to lecture here. You guys know this stuff. You know, this is really good. You know, culture is the way people solve problems. And people solve problems based on their value system. And what's one of the most important value systems what is one of the most important things that determines your value system? Religion and your family. I mean, and they're very interconnected. So if you're going to be working in team, and the team effectiveness is based on trust, that's why international ethics are going to become very important. And so we need to understand this complexity. We need to explore our own ethics before we can do that, before we can work with people who have different ethics. And we really need to deepen our insights into the various ethical perspectives that people have. And just in the same ways that I explained before, universalists, we have the Judeo-Christian rules, and we look at that and then we apply them, while other people will just look at the situation and how will we reconcile those differences when we have to make decisions. And most of our ethical decisions are actually happening when we are doing things at work. I mean, we think, of course, in our families, you know, we have this trust and this jointness in our families. But when we are in situations at work, that's when the ethical dilemmas are coming forth. And so we need to be able to recognize these ethical dilemmas. And we need to be able to reconcile and act upon them without losing our own ethical values. And that's a very important skill in the global environment. We also will need, and this is one of the theses that I bring forward, that the globalization proponents and the anti-globalization movement, these people are like us and them. We are not dialoguing together. We are just against one another. And I think that a way that we could be dialoguing together is by making the corporations responsible for a really sustainable environment in which people work. And that could be one of the ways to reconcile the way things. And it's really scary because some of the research in ethics that's going on is saying that actually religion and the family is losing ground over the corporations. That where people learn their ethics is in the corporation rather than in their family and their religion. Because that's not where most of the people on earth learn their ethics anymore. And so this is very scary. So we really need to advocate, either we advocate religious and family backgrounds, or we advocate that at least for those people that didn't get it through their religion and family, that the workplace becomes one of the places. And that's a scary thought when you think about that. So these workplaces, this is all affecting how productive people were. We're not into this for the soft side of things, right? This is a business proposition. We're into this because in the future, companies cannot survive without our human capital. And our human capital cannot be productive unless they can deal with those issues. So that's kind of the link to that. I'm aware of my time here. The last one that I have is global leadership. And just to shortly summarize, again, most of the leadership theories are originating in the United States, and there are now some voices that are coming around that said that we need to develop new leadership theories that take into account this global environment. And so a number of new, just now in the 21st century, just 3 new books that I really want to emphasize here for you, and one of them is actually by one of your professors here at the business school, which is Global Explorer, which is probably, if you have not, this is a must on your reading list. What this book is saying is that it tells you that the next generation of leaders are going to have some global competencies, and it delineates. Hal Gregerson is the person who wrote this book together with some other co-authors, and it's a gem of a book. It really tells you what these capabilities are going to be if we're going to have this global leadership. That's not just American leadership, but that's really leadership that works in various places of the world. Another book which I mentioned, and I'm not going to make such a, this is Connective Leadership, which is by a Stanford professor who's also done hot teams and leadership, and she's also making the proposition that we need to rediscover what leadership is. And then the first book is again by a cultural theorist, von Strompenaars, and Hamden Turner, and what they are saying is that leaders are the ones who can reconcile dilemmas. They're the ones who can work in an ambiguous way. They can work with people that think like this and people that think like that, and they can reconcile it. And those are the leaders of the future. So we are really getting into very new grounds as to how we're going to work in this global environment. I'm just making a few recommendations here that we must reinvent a new mode of people management, that our current way that we're managing people at work might not be the way that's going to work in the future because we have very different environments. We have very rapid change, that we must balance people and business needs. And that's not always happened. It sounds like very trite to say that. That we must really devolve implementation of management practices to countries themselves and, to the companies in the local areas, that we can't just go and dictate all around the world. That the global component should be an integral part of what people are doing in business. And that we also need to now look at what's happening outside of this country and learn from some of the best practices that are going on, because we tend to always look within our own backyard, but there's good stuff going on. I'm aware of the differences in time. Just 1 or 2 more minutes for a few questions. And yes.
You talked about developing a global mindset.
Yes.
What can we do as undergraduate students and those preparing to go into the workforce or more in the graduate school to obtain that global mindset?
I think there's a variety of things that you can do. First of all, you have learned that global mindset through experience. All right. Now, the scientific processes you can either learn through experience, and then you develop your intuition, your theories about them. All right. But you can also learn from the knowledge base that's already there, and then go and experience it. So I would probably recommend, I could recommend a half a dozen really good books that are out there that you really need to read before you graduate. Because one of them is Global Explorers. Another one is Riding the Waves of Culture. I mean, they are just international dimensions of organizational behavior by Adler, and these are classic things, you know, that you need to because having experienced already a global environment, when you learn those concepts, you'll be able to evaluate. You know, what you've learned is really there's a theory, a method to that. The second thing that I would say is that try to work as much as possible in diverse groups that you can on campus. You know, embrace, in a conceptual sense, every international student who is on your campus and learn from them. Because there is no, it's also going to be a great way, you know, build friendships with them. It's also going to be a great way when you have to work in an international environment, there'll be people you trust that you can rely on. You know, relationship building is very important to work in a global environment. I mean, it's important to work in a domestic environment too. So those are just two things on the top of my head. Yeah, you can also come to the Monterey Institute to get a degree in international business. So I had to put that plug in. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. And